Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina wa Habibina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam tasliman kathira. Alhamdulillah, nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina. Man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlil fala hadiya lahu. Wa salatuhu wa salamuhu ala Sayyidina wa Habibina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa man walah. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Alhamdulillah. Bismillah. Before we get into Mizan al-Amal, one of the major Mizan al-Amal really is the standard of action. It's Imam al-Ghazali wrote 2 books. One of them was called Mizan al-Ilm, and it's a book on logic. Logic traditionally was considered the grammar of thinking. You need grammar, for instance, to speak properly because language is communication. If you learn how to communicate properly, then it facilitates human understanding. And one of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given the human being is the ability to speak. أَعْلَمُهُ الْبَيَانِ. And that's from the Rahman, the Merciful, taught us how to speak, because speaking is one of the great mercies of Allah to humans, because we're able to communicate, unlike animals that have obviously some level of communication, but they cannot, for instance, the bird can't go to a bird doctor to find out what's ailing it and have a CAT scan and determine that the bird brain is suffering or something from a tumor, from putting his nest on a chimney and inhaling too much smoke. That's not going to happen. So humans were given language, and language is extremely important to know and learn language. Now, in Aboriginal cultures, one of the interesting things about Aboriginal cultures, and these are the earliest cultures that we have, Bedouin comes from Beda, to appear. They're the first human beings, the Bedu. And the Bedu are not simply the Arab Bedu. They're Aboriginal, from the original people. So sometimes they're called first peoples. Wherever these people are, one of the things that's significant about them is that their language is highly specific. And they often, anthropologists are amazed at how sophisticated their languages are. They often have names for all of the relatives, so each one has a specific name. They have names for all of the things in their environment, so they don't use something like thingamajig. Where's the thingamajig? Which is for people that don't know the names of everything. Now, obviously, as culture gets more sophisticated, there are more names. And this is why the English language has literally hundreds of thousands of words. The Arabic language is probably the richest in terms of the actual number of possible words, because it has a method of bringing new words. For instance, a word that appeared in the 1940s in the Arab world was tahatlara, yatahatlaru. And it's in dictionaries, which means to behave like Hitler. So that's an Arabic word that can be used. Or to Amraka, he became an American. Or to Maghraba, he became a Westerner. So this is something that Arabic has this ability to generate words, which is one of the unique aspects. Other languages tend to borrow from languages, which was why the Majami' al-Lughawiyya were so important in the Muslim world. Fu'ad al-Awwal, the king of Egypt, who was unjustly overthrown in that coup, he actually was a great patron of the Arabic language and started these first centers for the preservation of the Arabic language and for the advancement of the Arabic language as new words came in. So, for instance, the word telephone is used commonly, but the Arabs have a term in classical Arabic called hatif, which is a voice that you can hear but you can't see the source of it. And so this word was used, it's actually used in Sufi terminology. The hatif is sometimes people like Omar heard Sadiya, his general, he called out to him from This was before AT&T. This is Muslim traditional telecommunications, right? Sayyidina Umar was on the minbar in Medina, and he said, Ya Sariyat al-Jabal, Sariya, look to the mountain. And nobody in Medina knew what he was talking about. This is one of his confirmed miracles. But Sariya heard his voice in Persia, and he was warning him about an army that was going to attack them. So he was saying, look to the mountain. So Hatif is an example of bringing that. So when societies get complicated and sophisticated, you need language. Language is absolutely essential. Now the problem with language is that it becomes corrupted. Now modern linguists, and this is a whole madhab or school in the West, will argue there's no such thing as language being corrupted. It's just what people speak. And this is a view of language. And so they don't like grammarians. They don't like these pedants that tell them that you don't say, if somebody says, how are you? You don't say, I'm good. You say, I'm well. They don't like that. And they rebel against it. And they think that these grammarians, they call them grammar Nazis, are really, they don't understand that the nature of language is fluid and that it changes. But part of the problem with that approach is that language is for communication. And if you allow it to constantly change, then you lose the ability to communicate. One of the things that the early ulama debated was whether it was permitted for people to have private languages. Think about that. In other words, in a lot of cultures, you have subcultures that speak in their own lingo. And their fear was that if you allowed private languages to emerge, it would create dissension in a society because people could not communicate together. And this is why Umar radiallahu anhu actually beat people for speaking grammatically incorrect language. And Abu Bakr was very concerned about it also. Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya in his book on Usul al-Fiqh said that it makes perfect sense that the Khalifa would be concerned about the preservation of language in his society because he knew that that is how communication is preserved. So if language breaks down, communication breaks down. And this is why young people and old people can't speak anymore, because they speak a different language. They don't know their communication. And when this breaks down, society breaks down. And you no longer have the purpose of language being fulfilled, which is to unify people. And so grammar is actually very important because syntax, which is the proper word order, and although languages have flexible word orders, they have nonetheless rules of word ordering. Because if I begin to change an English word order, now obviously when you hear a foreign person speak English, who's not native to English, they will often use the syntax of their language and put it into English because they're used to thinking in the syntax of their language. We can get used to that, and there's certain expectations from certain peoples about that. But a lot of people can't understand them. 1 out of 4 people in America cannot understand somebody if they're speaking in just a foreign accent. So you lose 25% of your population just in not pronouncing the English correctly. But most of us can work it out, what they're trying to say generally. But there's cause for concern because people can miscommunicate. So grammar was a very important science in Islamic tradition because, and it comes according to our tradition, Abu Aswad al-Du'ali. I mean, modern redactors reject these and say they're apocryphal. But this is, all of our books convey these stories, and I don't see any reason to doubt them. But Abu Aswad al-Du'ali, he was with his daughter, and they were looking at the sky, and she said, ما أجمل السماء يا بابا, and he said النجوم. You know what? She put the sama, she made it majrur, and she said, I didn't mean that. I meant how beautiful it is. So she wanted to use ta'ajjub, like ما أجمل السماء يا أبتي. It should have been mansub, but she made it majroor. He was very concerned about this, so he went to Imam Ali and he told him, he was a student of Imam Ali, and he said, you should put down some rules to protect the language. And then he told him, العربية تنقسم لاسم وفعل وحرف فنحو هذا النحو. The language is divided into three, nouns, verbs, and particles, and prepositions, all those other, what they call glue words in linguistics. And then he said, so go this path, فنحو هذا النحو, which is where we get the word nahu, which means grammar, from Sayyidina Ali saying, go this way. So nahu is what grammar is called in the Arabic language. So one of the big problems in our culture now is communication. We have a very hard time communicating. Now, another problem that's added to that is when you have a religious tradition that obviously, as all religious traditions are, is rooted in a revelation. The revelation is delivered in language. So, because language has ambiguity, in other words, it has more than one way of being understood, you get problems arise. Problems of communication. Because I can say something and you can understand, you know, I can say, let's eat, Grandma. And if you're there with me and I'm talking to my grandmother, but you think I'm saying, let's eat, Grandma, right? Because there should be a little comma there. Then this is the nature of language. It can be misunderstood. And people have been, according to our tradition, people have died because of grammar mistakes, and people have also been saved because of grammar mistakes. There's a famous Khariji who wrote a line of poetry, and he said, وَمِنَّا أَمِيرَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ Shabibu, you know, and وَمِنَّا أَمِيرُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, and he put a dhamma, and from us is the caliph, and then he gave his name. So he was arrested, and then the real caliph said to him, you know, so you're claiming that he's the caliph and I'm not? He said, no, I didn't say that. I said, وَمِنَّا أَمِيرَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. And then he made it mansub, which is speaking to the Amir al-Mu'mineen, not claiming he was the Amir al-Mu'mineen. So they say that his knowledge of grammar got his head preserved, right? So anyway, there's a lot of stories like that in our tradition. But one of the things that prevented people from speaking about knowledge was a lack of knowledge of Arabic, and that included rhetoric, because rhetoric is one of the fundamental and most important sciences in our tradition, because rhetoric deals with things like kinaya, isti'ara, and then there's different types of isti'ara, which are metaphors, analogies, metonymies. These are very sophisticated tropes and figures in language that can mean different things, even contextually. They can have different meanings. So these are all sources of confusion for people that don't know, but they're also sources of difference of opinion for people that know. And this is why our tradition has such... Islam is the only religious tradition that I can see outside of the Jewish tradition. It's the only religious tradition that really understood that human beings truly, legitimately differ in their understandings. And so it codified a type of difference of opinion that enabled Muslims to live together and practice different things and do different things in different ways, and yet live in solidarity. One of the proofs of this that it is an intention of our Creator, because Allah did not make all the flowers one color. He diversified them. So you have red roses and white roses, you have azaleas, you have daisies. They're all flowers. They have an essential nature of a flower, but they differ because Allah loves differences, and it's a reason why when bouquets are often made, they're made with a lot of different flowers. People prefer a diverse bouquet than a bouquet of all the same flowers, unless they're roses, because roses have a special maqam amongst flowers. But these differences were codified in a tradition called usul al-fiqh. Our religion has two usul, usul al-din and usul al-fiqh. Usul al-din is what you believe, it's the foundations of our belief, and usul al-fiqh is the foundations of our practice. And this is, all of Islam is divided into ilm and amal. And so the foundation of ilm is usul ad-din, which has come to be known as aqidah. It came to be known early on as kalam, which was initially a very negative term, and there are a lot of negative statements about it by the early imams. Later on, it was incorporated into the Sunni tradition as a positive term, meaning dialectical theology, a theology of question and answer. And then usul al-fiqh, which is the foundation of how we derive rulings, legal rulings about things. Because everything in Islam is categorized under one of 7 categories, 5 primary ones and 2 secondary ones. The 5 primary ones, I think all of you know, are wajib or fard. And then there's nuances in the Hanafis, and they differ about wajib and fard, but generally they're considered synonyms. And then you have mandub, which is encouraged. That's also called nafila and sunnah. And then it goes into sunnah mu'akkada, sunnah manduba, raghiba. They're different. These are all technical terminology of usuli scholars to determine a category. But the first category, you have to do it. If you don't do it, you're punished. Second category, you're encouraged to do it, but if you don't do it, you're not punished. Third category, mubah, which is also called jaiz. But jaiz can also mean makruh. So something's permitted, but it could be makruh. And then the third, so that's neutral. The third one is makruh, which is that if you do it, you're not punished for doing it. If you don't do it out of a belief that it's makruh, then you're given a reward for not doing it. And then the final one is haram, which is also called mamnu' and muharram. And haram, if you do it, you're punished. And if you leave it, you're given a reward. So if you look, the rewards are much more than the punishments in those 5 categories. And then you have what's called, fasid or batil and sahih, contracts that are either valid or invalid. And then depending on situations, even an invalid contract could be considered valid if time has passed and there was khilaf about it. Anyway, these are all usuli. So this is how the usuli scholars determined how we derive rules. Now what's important about this is one of the things that has been lost in our tradition is the dynamic engagement of the usuliyun of deen, in other words the theologians, with the world, and the usuliyun of fiqh with the world. And so what's happened is our theologians stopped addressing problematic issues confronting believers. And so we have very few books that deal seriously with evolution. We have very few, and people are confused about this. We have almost no books that even mention quantum physics and the problems of cause and effect. We have very few books that deal with nominalism and essentialism, which are problems, or critical theory, which involve problems that relate to aqidah as well as fiqh. So, because the tradition has ossified or petrified. When I was young, my grandmother used to take us to a place called the Petrified Forest. It's in Sonoma, and it's trees that have been there so long they've become stone. So a living thing became a dead thing. In many ways, this is what's happened to our tradition. A living thing became a dead thing. It's still a marvel to look at, but it's dead. In other words, it's not actively because the definition of life biologically is that it responds to stimuli. If it doesn't respond to stimuli, it's dead. So, usul al-din and usul al-fiqh are supposed to respond to the stimuli through ijtihad, through radd al-shubuhat, either through legal reasoning to arrive at conclusions, or through the ability to refute obfuscation, shubuhat, things that create doubt in the minds of believers. New atheism, which is far less sophisticated than old atheism. And one of the proofs that people are really, really uneducated today is that the new atheists are read instead of the old atheists who were much more sophisticated. I mean, Nietzsche runs rings around Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens or Dennett, any of these people, runs rings around them in the sophistication. Even the ancient Greeks, in their level of sophistication. Materialism is not new. Materialism existed in the time of the Greeks. There were materialists that believed that this was all there was. They didn't believe in spirits, they just believed in matter. So materialism is not new. Humans have been confronting materialism for centuries. Karl Marx wrote his PhD thesis on the Greek materialists. And those were the ones that Plato and Socrates were going around and destroying their arguments. So nothing is new under the sun in that way. But one of the things today is that there's a level of education that has led to a lot of people being exposed to ideas that they would not have been exposed to in the past. And because they're semi-educated, partially educated, most of us are half-wits, because true education is on the quantitative and qualitative sciences. Most of us, my quantitative side is much weaker than my qualitative side. I studied a lot more the language arts than I did the sciences, but I did have science education. And I'm able to read science books if they're not extremely technical. But a lot of people aren't educated anymore in one or the other, and very few are educated in both. Very few people on this planet are really educated in both. Our traditional ulama were educated in both. So these all create problems and a lot of confusion. Now, the ulama dealt with these things different ways. One of the most important things that they felt to prove was the prophecy of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. They were not that interested in proofs for the existence of God, partially because the Quran says, "Afillahi shak," is there any doubt about God? That it's really not it's a fitra thing to believe in God. It's very easy to convince children that, God exists. I mean, you could say, well, it's easy to convince them that Santa Claus exists, but at a certain point, they actually can see the difference between the two. Because it's very difficult for people to believe that this popped into existence out of nothing. Or that this organization that we see, the opposable thumb, the eye, the ear. I was with an audiologist who was checking the ears of one of the Mauritanians that was with us in America. And on her wall, she had a PhD in just the ear. Isn't that amazing? Just the ear. That was her PhD. It's like 5 years of just studying the ear. And she had pictures on her wall with all of these ears, the eardrum, the shell, all of these intricate, the eighth cranial nerve, its relation to the central nervous system. And I said to her, it's amazing, the ear, isn't it? That just the level of sophistication in its design. And she said, it's funny you say that, because she said, I entered grad school and I didn't really believe in religion, or I was trained in science and much more interested in science. But during my PhD program, just studying the ear, I became more and more convinced that this could not have just happened by chance. And now Dawkins would say that, well, she doesn't really understand evolution, right? But that's a fitra response. And that's just the ear, let alone the eye. Darwin referred to it as that damned eye, because it was hard to explain how it evolved. But this is the age that we're living in. We're living in an age where you've got all these people out there creating doubts, and you don't have responders to the doubts. So this created a lot of problems. Now, to accentuate the problem even more, you have a new phenomenon in our community, which is all of these people who have never been trained in grammar, in rhetoric, in logic, in the traditional madrasa studies. But they've gone to schools. So they went to public schools in Egypt or in Iraq or in Syria they have a relatively reasonable knowledge of Arabic. They can read it fairly well. And then they begin to self-study. And they become autodidacts. And so they read the Quran and the Hadith. Now, one of the things about Hadith tradition, both Quran and Hadith, it was prohibited traditionally to take Quran and Hadith from books. Right? لا تأخذ القرآن من مصحفي ولا تأخذ الحديث من صحفي. That was a qaida amongst the ulama. Don't take the Quran from the mushaf and don't take knowledge from sahafi. Sahafi is the one who learned from books. The reason for that is because they're too difficult. There's too many possibilities for error, even in the hadith. One example. In the hadith of the moon sighting, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, "Sumu li ru'yatihi wa aftiru li ru'yatihi." Fast in sighting it, and then he said, "Wa in ghumma alaykum." That's one riwayah. In ghubiya alaykum, that's another riwayah. In ghumiya alaykum, that's another riwayah. In ughmiya alaykum, that's another riwayah. And in umiya alaykum. All those are riwayat. And they all have different meanings. And so then faqduru lahu, it says faqduru lahu with a dhamma, faqduru lahu. But there's another riwayah, faqdiru lahu with a kasra. And they have different meanings. فَقْدُرُوا لَهُ قَدَرَ يَقْدُرُ and قَدِرَ يَقْدِرُ قَدَرَ يَقْدِرُ. So this is sarf. And by changing just the dhamma, you change the meaning from dhamma to kasra, you change the meaning of qadr. Now this takes a long time to learn. Just to learn the Arabic takes a long time. But then to learn the hadith, to listen to the muhaddith, and to learn, these take a long time. And this is why knowledge is difficult. It's not an easy thing. Knowledge is difficult. And so you have all of these people now that are out there and coming up with very different conclusions that the traditional people came up with. Let me give you one example. In the burning of the Jordanian, it was said that this was qisas, right? Do people know that? Did anybody follow that story? The burning of right? They said it was qisas, right? Well, in Sharia, you don't apply qisas in war. There's no qisas in war. There's no qisas in fitna. If a fitna happens and Muslims fight each other, there's no qisas. Because if you have qisas, it's just going to continue. It will never end. So you just forgive once it's all over. So that's the first problem. Nobody in the history of Islam said there's qisas in war. Second problem, the hudud aren't implemented during war. Qisas is part of hudud. Then, another problem, burning. The Prophet ﷺ ordered in a hadith to burn some people if they found them. And then later he said, don't burn them. أمرتكم أن تحرقوهم فلا تحرقوهم فلا يعذب بالنار إلا رب النار. I told you to burn these people, don't burn them, because nobody can punish with fire except the Lord of fire. So now that hadith, some of the ulama took that hadith, other ones didn't take it, because nasikh and masukh is a real problem in the hadith tradition. So some of them did not take that, because what they took was عَاقِبُوا بِمِثْلِ مَا عُقِبْتُمْ بِهِ, punish people according to the way that they've punished. Like in the Maliki tradition, in the Mukhtasar, it says, مَنْ قَتَرَ قُتِرَ بِمَا قَتَرَ وَلَوْ نَارًا. Whoever kills somebody, he's killed with what he was killed, even if it was fire. There's a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ, a Jewish man, threw a woman off and her head was smashed on a rock. He stole from her jewelry, And the Prophet ﷺ, according to the tradition, said his head was smashed with a rock. And this is what's called lex talionis. It's the Jewish tradition of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. It's right out of the Old Testament. But then the Prophet ﷺ, as his religion evolved, because it did evolve, the Prophet ﷺ was part of a process. He had legal rulings that later were changed. And this is to show that situations change rulings. This is the human condition. You can't just fix rulings and with statute law and think that you can apply that until the Day of Judgment. There are certain things that are thawabit in Islam, fixed, and there are other things that are mutaghayyirat. This is the usuli prerogative to work out what's fixed and what changes. It's a very sophisticated tradition, which is why we need usuli scholars, and they're actually considered the generals. According to Imam Qushayri, they're the generals of this ummah, because they're the ones that are able to command the troops. Not the fuqaha. The fuqaha can give you an opinion, but the usuli is the one that deals with new issues. And this is very important. Fatwa comes from fatiya, yafta, to be young. It's new, fresh. Right? So the root of fatwa is freshness. Also from it comes futuwa. What is futuwa? Chivalry. It defends the community. So the fatwa is a defense mechanism of the community to protect it from harm. So this was very, very important. And this is one of the crises that we find ourselves in. Now the Prophet ﷺ said, أَعَفُّ النَّاسِ قِطْرَةً أَهْلُ الْإِيمَانِ. The people that are most merciful. This is what Imam al-Munawi says it means. The people that are most merciful in their killing are the people of Iman. Because the Prophet said, إِذَا قَتَلْتُمْ فَأَحْسِنُوا الْقِتْلَةِ. If you have to kill, do it well. إِذَا ذَبَحْتُمْ فَأَحْسِنُوا الذِّبْحَ. If you're going to sacrifice an animal, do it well. In other words, don't cause the animal pain. Sharpen the knife. In the sunnah, you give the animal water. You don't kill it in front of other animals. The Prophet saw a man sacrificing an animal in front of another animal. He said, are you going to kill it twice? Because the other one's seeing it and you know, it's his friend. Right? You know, this is rahmah. But what does Imam al-Munawi say? He says, look at the way the kuffar kill. Right? He said they kill they torture, they do all this. This wasn't from Islam. The Prophet was a mercy, and he came as a mercy. And this is why the ulama, the majority of the ulama said, in qisas and in these things, you just kill them. Even in the riwayah al-Bukhari of Imam Ali, there's another riwayah that says he killed them first and then burnt them. So this idea of burning people, لا يعذب بالنار إلا رب النار. Despite the fact that there are riwayat, this is the position, and this is why the Ottomans never burnt people as a punishment. You know, the Muslims didn't do this. And even in the Quran, when it says when you meet the enemies, strike the necks, فَضَرْبُ الرِّقَابِ, right? Look at the tafsirs. They say this is the most merciful way to kill a person. If you have to kill them, be merciful. Don't cut their arm off first. Go right for the death blow. Because it's the most merciful way to kill. That's what they say in the books. That even in jihad, you're supposed to be merciful to people. So this whole idea of cruelty, it has nothing to do with Islam. And Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah said, if you see cruelty, know that it's not from this religion. Because the religion is rahmah. Even in killing, there's rahmah. And so Abdurrahman, Imam al-Munawi says about that hadith, أَعَفُّ النَّاسِ قِطْرَةً أَهْلُ الْإِيمَانِ. The people that are most, you know, iffa is like chastity, it's like aversion to something, you know, being, you know, a'affahu, like if you don't like something, you know, the people that are most averse to killing are the people of faith. Because they see they see the Creator in the creature. وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ. They see that you are a sign of God. Whether you're Jewish or Buddhist or Hindu, you're a creature, you are made by God, and therefore the sign of God is in you. And so they're loath to do anything. And that's why the Prophet said, لا تتمنوا لقاء العدو. Don't desire to meet an enemy. Don't desire it. There's a sickness in this desire to kill people. So, what I wanted to do was just look at some principles that were established. This is a book that was written, and you know, these problems have been around for a long time. It's not like they haven't been around. But the difference between the past and the present is that in the past you had hisba, you had regulators. You know, if you have, there are several doctors here. How many doctors here? Yeah. So are you licensed? Yeah. So what do you do to get licensed? Yeah, you have to pass an exam. What else? But before you get licensed, what do you have to do? Yeah. How many years?
Still counting. 8 years and 3 more.
Yeah. Okay. So that's 11 years, right, of training. Why? But why would they put all that effort into training you? Because, I mean, you could train a taxi driver. How long do they train for? I know it's more complex, but not driving in London. Because they take years to memorize all the streets. Yeah. Yeah. So the taxi driver has to know how to drive. Because if you let him drive taxis without a license, he's going to kill somebody. He might still kill somebody if he's reckless, because you can have a license and be reckless. Like doctors can kill people with a license. But we know that you cannot, even surgery, you have to do extra training. So you can be an MD, but you don't perform surgeries unless they're minor. But if you're going to do brain surgery, neurology is a very difficult. Even getting into a neurology residency is not that easy. Because it's very difficult, because you can really make a mistake. One slip of the scalpel and you've got, a lobotomized patient. This is for the protection of the body. Now the soul is where religion is concerned. It has a concern with the body, and that's why tib is a fard kifaya. It's considered a collective obligation to preserve the body as part of our tradition. You're not allowed to harm the body. La darara wa la darar. Don't harm the body. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Inna li jasadika alayka haqqa." Your body has rights over you. And the Prophet warned about overeating. The Quran warns about overeating. Kulu wa sharabu wa la tusiru innahu la yuhibbul musrifin. Eat and drink, and don't drink to excess, because Allah loves not the excessive. One of the Christians, when they heard that ayat, he said, "Ma taraka kitabuka shay'an li jalinus." Your book didn't leave anything for Galen, because traditional medicine believed that al-ma'idatu baytu da, the stomach is the seat of all disease. The National Center for Health in the United States, the NEH, says that the 80% of illnesses are caused by diet, bad eating. So fatwa is even more dangerous, right? In Urdu they say, Neem Hakim Khatari Jan, Neem Mullah Khatari Iman. Like to have a half-baked doctor is dangerous for the body, but to have a half-baked scholar is dangerous for the soul. Right? Now, the body is finite. The soul is infinite. The body will have 80, maybe 100, maybe 120. It's pretty unlikely you're going to go past 120. There have been people that have done that, but it's pretty unlikely. But the soul is eternal. So the danger involved in the soul is much worse. And this is why our scholars developed ways of ensuring that people, there was a licensing tradition. You had to get licensed, which was called ijaza. And that license was much more rigorous than it is today. And this is why even having a license today is not necessarily foolproof that the person isn't going to go astray. But generally, the ijaza tradition, and this is a proof of our religion, because the isnad is from our religion by consensus of the ulama. Al-isnadu min ad-din. Isnad is from religion. And lawla al-isnad laqala man sha ma sha. If it wasn't for the isnad, people would say whatever they wanted to say. So traditionally, you had to work before you got ijazah. You read with teachers. They could see the level of your reading. They would know the level of your understanding very quickly. I mean, if you study with any real sheikh, they'll quickly discern whether you're getting it or not. They can see it just on your face. And often they would ask you questions when they saw something was difficult, they would say. And the great teachers like Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya, somebody who's at that level, Sheikh Abdullah Wald Ahmedna is another one, really stunning understanding. Sheikh Muhammad Yaqubi has brilliant mind. I mean, really brilliant mind. And I haven't met anybody at the level of Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya, and I've had the good fortune of reading with several really great scholars, but I've never met anybody at the level of Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya in his understanding, in the vastness of his knowledge of Arabic, the vastness of his knowledge of the Book of Allah, of usul. And this is why he makes statements that the ulama haven't caught up with yet, because he's on another level. And Imam al-Ghazali was fought in his lifetime. Abu Bakr al-Tartushi, one of the greatest scholars of Imam al-Ghazali's period, wrote a book against him. Imam al-Maziri, the great Maliki scholar, one of the greatest Maliki scholars in our history, wrote a book against Imam al-Ghazali. Imam al-Ghazali's books were burnt in Andalusia and in Morocco. But it was Qadi Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi, who was a student of Abu Bakr al-Tartushi, that recognized Ghazali. Because when he met him, I mean, if you read the description of his meeting of al-Ghazali, he said, I went in there, and he was already a well-seasoned scholar at the highest level. He has over a 30-volume tafsir of the Quran that unfortunately got lost with the loss of Andalusia. But his 4-volume Ahkam al-Quran is a umda. It's a foundational book in the Maliki tradition, and as well as the other people read it. Like the Malikis read al-Jassas from the Hanafi tradition. The Hanafis read Qadi Abu Bakr from the Maliki tradition. So it's a book that transcends madhab. But Qadi Abu Bakr was a giant of his time. When he met Ghazali, he said, it was like I had been in darkness before that. And he said, I came into the room and it was as if the sun rose and eclipsed all the stars. And he said, I'd never seen anybody like him. And he sat with him, he read the Ihya with him, he read books, he asked him, he said, I wanted to understand the subtleties of his language. And so I asked him, and he said he treated me like the most generous of guests during the time that he stayed with him. He stayed with him in Jerusalem when he was in retreat, and he stayed with him in Baghdad. But he was the one that took his teachings back to North Africa, and Imam al-Ghazali's teachings spread. And so those critics of Ghazali during their time, even though they're great scholars, they didn't recognize, and with all respect to, because they are truly great scholars, but Shatibi mentioned that the fuqaha were like tuyus ala zariba. They're like goats fighting on the garbage heap. The ulama of one time. That's why you can't judge scholars in the time. A scholar can't really testify against another scholar in his time because of the hasad. Scholars are really understood after they're dead, because during their time they're always going to have people that envy them and attack them just because they're, and they won't, Kierkegaard said people will admit a felonious crime before they'll admit envy. Nobody's going to say, you say, no, you just envy him. Astaghfirullah. Me envy him. A'udhu billah. So, anyway. So I just want to go over a few of these rules. How much time do we have left, Asma? Okay. So I want to go through a few of these rules. من شأن العلماء بالله وبأحكام الله أن يذهبوا مع الناس في الرخصة والسعة ما لم يخاف المأثم. This is Sidi al-Mawaq was the last, al-Abdari, Muhammad al-Mawaq al-Abdari was the last great scholar of Andalusia. He literally was with when they surrendered Granada, he was the scholar that all of the other scholars recognized as the top scholar in Andalusia. So he is the last, he's Khatimat Ulama al-Andalus. He studied with great scholars. He's in the line of Ibn Lubbin and Shatibi, these great usuli scholars. He was an usuli scholar of the highest order. And he wrote this book. It's almost as if this book, which is called Sanan al-Muhtadin, it's as if he was saying, apply this book or else you will have the fate that we had in Andalusia. Because what destroyed Andalusia was all of the fitan between the Muslims. So he said, it is of the nature of the ulama billah wa bi ahkamillah. Because he divides Imam al-Ghazali said there were ulama billah, and then there were ulama of ahkam Allah, but not of Allah. And then there were ulama of Allah, but not the ahkam of Allah. And then there were ulama of Allah and the ahkam of Allah. So the ulama of Allah are people that know Allah profoundly, even if their knowledge of the Sharia is limited. They have to know at least the Fard Ain. But they could have limited knowledge. So you can have a great wali of God who has very little knowledge. And in the history there are, I'll give you a good example. Abu al-Abbas, Abu al-Abbas al-Hadrami, who was the teacher of Sidi Ahmed Zarruq, was illiterate. And Ahmed Zarruq was one of the greatest scholars of his time, but he sat with a man who was not, he spoke in Ammiya. Sidi Ahmed Zarruq took permission from him to put his sayings into classical Arabic, because he didn't speak proper Arabic. And there are many examples of that, of people that Allah gave great knowledge to. Sidi Abdul Aziz al-Dabbagh, the great Moroccan, is an example of that. So anyway, he said, it's from the nature of the ulama billah and of the ahkam of Allah, the categories or legal rulings of Allah, that they treat people, they give license to people. And يَذْهَبُوا مَعَ النَّاسِ فِي الرُّخْصَةِ وَالسَّعَةِ, to make things easy for people and give them room. This is the nature of the real ulama. They don't constrict for people. They give people license within limits. And this is why he says, مَا لَمْ يَخَافَ الْمَأْثَمِ, as long as they're not worried about sinfulness. And mar'u la ya'khudhu ala ahlihi bil wara'. A man should never expect scrupulousness from his own family. So if somebody has wara', and wara' means that you avoid anything that even smacks of doubt. And people of great scrupulousness will even not take permitted things, mubahat. So it just depends. But those people are not, they should not expect that from their own family or force it upon their family. بدعة الضلالة أعني أن تحكم على شيء بغير حكمه. The bid'ah of going astray, what the Prophet called كل بدعة ضلالة, right? Every bid'ah is a dalala. That's the bid'ah al-dalala. Every bid'ah is a dalala. Now, that is a bid'ah shar'iyya. So, and the hadith clarifies it on Aisha, which is in the Nawawi, من أحدث في أمرنا هذا ما ليس منه. He didn't say من أحدث في أمرنا فهو رد. He said من أحدث في أمرنا هذا ما ليس منه فهو رد. Because something can be from something. For instance, you have to know the times of prayer. Now, Sahaba didn't have watches. They told times by shadows. But if you use a watch, it should be a good one, like a Swiss watch. If you use a watch to determine the prayer time, which many of us do, right? We look on our watch and we see, oh, it's time to pray. We go pray. We didn't go check the shadows. The sunnah was to check shadows. So that is a ihdath. To use prayer schedules is a hadath. It's a bid'ah. But it's a bid'ah that's from the religion. It's minhu. And that's why it's permitted. If it's not from it, it's a bid'ah dalala. And that's an important distinction. So he said, أَن تَحْكُمْ عَلَى شَيْءٍ بِغَيْرِ حُكْمِهِ. It's to give a thing a ruling that is not its ruling. So to say something like the mawlid, to say that this is wajib, right? It's mandub to learn the seerah of the Prophet. The mawlid was one of the techniques that people brought later to teach people seerah. If you look at mawalid, they're basically seerah. You could literally call a mawlid a seerah. But to say that this is from the religion and this is that if you don't do it something, no, that now you've made it a bid'ah because you've given it a hukum that's not its hukum. الأحاديث إذا تعارضت ولم يعلم الناسخ من المنسوخ تساقطت ويبقى شيء على إباحته إذ لا يثبت حكم على مسلم إلا بدليل لا معارض له. This is a really important one. When you have hadiths that contradict each other, if you don't know the nasikh from the mansukh, in other words, the abrogating hadith from the abrogated hadith, then neither of them are taken. They lose their authoritative power to determine a ruling. And the thing is considered mubah. And then he says, because you cannot determine a hukum against another Muslim except with a dalil that has no objection. It has no... and this is why when there's a khilaf, he'll get into that, but this is a really important point. أقوال العلماء إذا تعارضت في أمر فقيل هو مشروع وقيل غير مشروع ما يكون هذا قط أحط مرتبة من المباح. If the ulama differ about an affair and they say, one says it's permitted and the other says it's not permitted, then ما يكون هذا قط, it will never be less than the ruling of permitted. Right? Because it's not mujma' alayh. The ulama have to agree on tahrim to say that it's haram. You can take the position of the one that says not to do it, tawarru'an, out of scrupulousness, but you can't expect that of others, even your own family. ما كرهه بعض الأئمة واستحبه آخرون ففعله أولى كرفع اليدين لأن الشرع يحتاط لفعل المندوبات كما يحتاط لفعل الواجبات. Those things that some of the ulama detested and others considered to be recommended, to do them is more appropriate. So if they differ about this is makruh or this is mustahab, then it's preferred to take the mustahab position, like raising your hands in dua. Because some say the Malikis traditionally did not raise their hands in the dua. Even though there's hadith and some hadith say hatta they could see the ibtay al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. But traditionally, and some of my teachers don't raise it. Like Murabt al-Hajj, I never saw him raise his hands for dua. So some take that position. But he's saying that in the hadiths are there, there's a difference of opinion, it's about mustahab, it's better to raise your hands in the dua. أجمع العلماء على اتقاء مواضع الخلاف. The ulama have agreed to guard yourself against these places of difference of opinion. Be very careful about these places of difference of opinion. الرؤيا من غير الأنبياء لا يحكم بها شرعا على حال. The Prophet ﷺ said that a true dream that a believer sees is 1/46 of prophecy. In other words, a true dream is part of prophecy, but the one having it is not a prophet, and therefore no legal ruling can be taken from the dream. Even in the books of fiqh about the prayer time, it says, لا اعتبار بكشف الولي. There's no consideration for the kashf of a wali could know right when the prayer time comes in and just say, دخل الظهر. Kashfan. But you can't use that like a watch. Because you can have dajajila, you can have people that aren't really awliya making these claims. So, but then he says, إِلَّا أَن تَعْرِضَهَا على ما في أيدينا من الأحكام الشرعية فإن سوغتها عمل بمقتضاها. So if that ru'ya does not go against the ahkam al-shar'iyyah, then it's permissible to act according to it. So for instance, one of the great salihin or awliya might see in a dream where he's told to do a certain dhikr a certain number of times. He can do that. Because if it was a true dream, he could do it, and it's part of the deen. But you can't make a legal ruling and say, oh, it's mandub to do this so many times. But if somebody understands that's a ru'ya, somebody saw Imam al-Kattani, and he mentions it in the book, saw that to do the 40 times, Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum, La ilaha illa anta, subhanaka. Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum, La ilaha illa anta, 40 times before Fajr, he says that the heart won't die when other hearts die. So you'll find that done in some places, based on that vision of the salih. So that's what he says. But it's not a hukm shar'i. You don't take a hukm shar'i. But you can do a mustahab. Something, dhikr is mustahab, as long as it doesn't go against any amr or injunction from the Prophet. Al-bid'atu an tahkuma ala shay bighayri hukmihi. We already did that. حقيقة البدعة المذمومة هي التي تميت السنة أو تكاد تفضي إلى إماتتها. The reality of a negative bid'ah is something that causes the sunnah to die. It puts to death the sunnah, or it will lead to the death of the sunnah. So one of the things that is from the sunnah is dhikr. So as long as the dhikr is masnoona, it's permissible to do it according to, for instance, the way certain scholars have put together awrad. As long as those awrad are from the deen, you can do that from that, because that's the sunnah. So if you read Imam al-Haddad's wird, that's not the way the Prophet ﷺ did his wird as far as we know, because we don't have the details of how the order. We know some things, the order of some things, but not everything. But all those things that are put in there are from the sunnah. And this is true of a lot of these awrad. And then there are some awrad that are not acceptable, that some people put together. It's not permissible to use languages that aren't known, or to write magical formulas like in talismans and things like that. Stars and numbers and things like that, numerology. Those things aren't permitted. النصوص الصريحة بالنهي في القرآن والسنة فيما هو وارد على ما في ملك الإنسان أنه نهي أدب أو إرشاد لا نهي تحريم. Many of the prohibitions in the Quran and the Sunnah that relate to the individual behavior are the nahi of adab and irshad. They're prohibitions of guidance and comportment. They're not prohibitions of tahrim. So there are many things where the nahi is in the hadith, but it's actually not for prohibition. And this is again, the usulis look at the nahi and try to determine what type of nahi it is. And that's why there's some khilaf about what's prohibited and what's not, because of the actual hadith that they differ on. Al-amru bil ma'ruf yakunu bi ma'ruf. To command good should only be done in a good way. So you're supposed to have rifq, gentleness with people, and not harshness. Amru al-hisbati laysa bil huwaina. The regulating the people through amr bil ma'ruf and nahi anil munkar, regulating people, regulating the markets, this is not an easy affair. It needs a lot of knowledge, because there are a lot of differences of opinion, and you're not supposed to condemn things that there's a legal difference of opinion and people have a right to do it. Al-makruh min qabil al-jaiz. The makruh is still considered from the jaizat. So even if you see somebody doing something that's makruh, you could tell them that that's makruh, or you just leave them alone if you don't think there's any benefit in that, or it's actually better for them to be doing that, because if you tell them, like Ibn Taymiyyah passed by some of the Mongols that were playing chess, and he didn't say anything, and somebody said, why don't you condemn them? Because most of the ulama didn't like games of lahu. I mean, imagine what they would say about these games everybody's playing now. But they didn't like games of lahu because it was a waste of time. That's for people of maqam, if they're utilizing their time. But for common people, he left them because he said, this is preoccupying them. If they weren't doing this, they'd be doing something worse. So just leave them alone. Like he understood, prioritize. حكم المكروه عدم نقضه بعد وقوعه. So the ruling of makruh is not to rescind it after it's already happened. So you can have a makruh contract, but once it's happened, you just leave it. Right? النهي عن الشيء أمر بضده أو بأحد أضداده إن كان ذا أضداد. To prohibit something is to enjoin its opposite or one of its opposites if it has opposites. So this hukm is nuanced because it's not always applicable. قلة الإثم بنسبة إلى كثرته خير كثير. A little bit of evil as opposed to a lot of evil is a great good. It's a really important point. And the Arabs say, فلان خير من فلان. So-and-so is better than so-and-so. And they mean أقل شرا. He has less evil. So less evil is a good. And this is why in usul you have ارتكاب خف الضررين. Taking the lesser of two evils. So sometimes the lesser of two evils is a great good. Again, this is understanding. القرب إذا شهد الشرع باعتبار جنسها فهي مندوبة. Drawing near to Allah, if the Sharia recognizes the genus, it can become manduba. So something that the Prophet did not command to do, but it's from its jins, the genus of it. Like for instance, learning the seerah is a sunnah, and very important for Muslims. That's why traditionally most of the ulama permitted gathering to recite stories about the Prophet's birth and his period and how he was when he was a child and these things, because they considered it from the genus of it. And other ones, a small group said that it wasn't. That's a khilaf. Really, technically, they should not condemn the ones that do it, and the ones that do it should also not condemn them for not doing it, because they're not doing it, not because they don't love the Prophet ﷺ, they're actually doing it in their belief that the Prophet wouldn't want them to do it. So they're doing it out of love for the Prophet. They're not doing the mawlid out of love for the Prophet ﷺ. And then other ones are doing it out of love for the Prophet. So both groups should be seen in the light of love of the Prophet ﷺ. It's not that they don't love him. They want to follow his sunnah. قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهِ فَاتَّبِعُونِي يُحْبِبْكُمُ اللَّهِ وَيَغْفِرْ ذُنُوبَكُمْ. Right? That if you love Allah, follow me. So they believe that is the ittiba', is not to do ihdath, not to do something the salaf didn't do. And so that's their position. Whereas other ulama said, no, it's from the genus, and therefore it can be considered manduba. This is their opinion. These are differences of opinion. This is how the ummah gets united. You see, by recognizing legitimacy of difference of opinion of the ulama. And not just to say my way or the highway, I'm the only one. They didn't differ until knowledge came to them. بَغْيًا بَيْنَهُمْ, oppressing each other with the knowledge. So you're wrong, I'm right. Imam Shafi'i said, I think I'm right, but I could be wrong. I think my interlocutor is wrong, but he could be right. That's the position of the real ulama. They take their position, but they recognize he has a legitimate opinion if it's done within the confines of usul. النوافل ما قدر الشرع أن في فعله ثوابا من غير أن أمر به أو رغب فيه أو فعله. The nawafil, extra acts, are what the Sharia considers in that act is a reward, whether it tells you to do it or encourages it or did it itself. So for instance, there are a lot of things that Muslims have done. I mean, I'll give you an example. You know, our sister in the United States encouraged people to help rebuild the churches. Now, there were all these Muslims saying, you know, haram, you can't rebuild churches. And there's a couple of things to say. First of all, the Muslims traditionally protected churches. Right now, they're destroying churches in Muslim countries. People that claim they're following Islam are literally blowing up churches, tearing down their crosses, doing these things, right? This is a great crime against another religion that has the validity of perpetuity. It has the right to perpetuate itself. Traditionally, the Muslims in the Ahkam al-Sharia, they did not permit Christians to build new churches. But don't forget, populations were stable at that time. It's only very recently that populations have begun to grow. In Andalusia, because the Christians were always a majority, the ulama actually permitted them to build new churches. Because the Muslims aren't there to oppress people. And the African American community, the most beautiful people that I've met in the United States are devout Christian African Americans. I mean, hands down, I would take them over any other people in my country. And I'm not saying that gratuitously. My experience, beautiful communities, and the black church preserved the African American community. It preserved their families. Most of the churches, most of the great black institutions of learning in the United States, like Dunbar College, Dunbar High School, and Howard University, and these things. If you study the history, these were often devout Christians that started these institutions, in that community, the black church has been really destroyed. And so for Muslims to be in solidarity and help them rebuild a church that was already there, not building a new church or fundraising to build, no, but in solidarity that we're in the United States and we are also a community, our mosques are under threat. And just as we would want them to support us in our expression of freedom of religion, we want to support them in their expression. That's usul al-fiqh. And this is understanding. And unfortunately, it's something our community lacks a great deal of. So that's another problem. ما اختلف العلماء في تحليله وتحريمه فلا يقال فيه حرام. If the ulama differ about the tahleel or the tahrim of something, you don't call it haram. لا تقولوا تصفوا ألسنتكم الكذبة هذا حلال وهذا حرام لتفتروا على الله الكذبة إن الذين يفترون على الله الكذبة لا يفلحون. Right? Don't claim, don't describe with your tongues halal and haram. In other words, don't make the haram halal and don't make the halal haram. النهي عن المنكر لا يتعلق إلا بالمجمع عليه ولا ينكر المختلف فيه. To forbid a vice is only if that is an agreed upon vice. That in which people differ about, there should be no munkar. And this, if people would just apply this one usuli principle, so much of the dissension and problems in our community would be resolved. Wallahi, just this one principle. If they would just apply this one principle. If it's mukhtalafi, the calculation and the moon sighting by naked eye, it's mukhtalafihi. If people follow that one, they have a valid ijtihad. If people follow the other one, my personal opinion, I think the calculation is extremely weak, but it's there. And to deny it is to deny the ikhtiraf of our ulama. And that's why I'm not going to say their fasting is invalid. I'm not going to say that. And amongst the naked eye sighters, again, some go by that, just a ummiyah tradition of, if they say they saw it and they saw it, even if science says they couldn't have seen it. I don't believe that opinion either, because we developed these sciences. But, again, it's a difference of opinion. And this is, we don't have to hate each other or get angry. I mean, Imam Tahir in my community, he went with the sightings. I wouldn't go with the sightings. I love Imam Tahir. He's a beautiful human being. Really, he's one of the best people I know.
So why should we hate each other over these differences? This is human beings. We're going to differ. But as long as we differ within the confines of the mukhtalaf fihi, with sound usuli principles, then we can get along and our Islam can flourish. But if it's my way or the highway, it's no way. It's moon fighting instead of moon sighting. Right? It's lunacy instead of lunar sighting. مذهب المحققين أن كل مجتهد مصيب. The madhab of the masters, the muhaqqiq are the people of tahqiq. They're the great ulama. The madhab of the masters is the madhab of musawwiba, that every mujtahid is correct. Now, the hadith says, من اجتهد وأصاب فله أجر ومن فله أجران ومن اجتهد وأخطأ فله أجر. That hadith which is sound, whoever makes an ijtihad and is correct, he gets 2 rewards. If he makes it validly with the tools of ijtihad and he is mistaken, then he gets 1 reward. How does that square with that they're all correct? Because that you ta'awwal al-hadith. That hadith is interpreted by the musawwiba to mean that the khata is with God, but not with us. We consider it to be sound if they did it correctly with the proper ijtihad tools. But Allah knows. So, as far as we're concerned, it's a sound ijtihad. I disagree with it, but it's sound. So every mujtahid is musib. And that's the muhaqqiqeen. Those are the masters that concluded that. The other madhab is the mukhatti'ah, the ones that say no, they're wrong. But this is the true school that will unite our community. الرد على قول ابن حزم أجمع على أن متبع الرخص فاسق. Ibn Hazm's opinion that those who follow licenses are fasiq is rejected. انعقد الإجماع على أن من أسلم فله أن يقلد من يشاء من العلماء بغير حجر أو حجر. It's a muthallah. So the ijma' is that whoever becomes Muslim, he can follow anybody who's a scholar and take his opinion. So when I first became Muslim, I happened to become Muslim with Malikis. So they just told me, pray with your hands down, move your finger like that, do 1 taslima. That's what I learned. Then I saw other Muslims. What are they doing? Don't worry about that. They're Hanafis or they're okay. They're all correct. That's what they said. They're all correct. But Sheikh Nuh, he met Shafi'i, so he became Shafi'i. Imam Zayd went to Syria and studied with Shafi'i, so he's Shafi'i. كلهم من رسول الله ملتمسون. All of them took from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they're all correct, even though the ijtihadat are different. لا تسع الفتيا والحكم إلا بمشهور المذهب. That you should really teach the mashhur of a madhab, because madhabs have so many diverse opinions that, again, you will create disunity in the community. Now, I would argue in our time, this is true for ibadat. For mu'amalats, it's a little trickier, and that's why with the mu'amalat, there needs to be a lot more leeway, just to make things easier for people. But for the ibadat, that's true. That unless it's a difficult situation, you can get people out of. العارفون بالله أفضل من العلماء بأحكام الله. Those who know Allah are better than those who simply know the rulings of Allah. But those are things that Allah knows. من الورع الخروج من الخلاف. It's part of scrupulousness to get out of khilaf, difference of opinion. So wara' is to get out of khilaf, but you cannot impose wara' on other people. You can only impose it on yourself. So it's better to follow a more conservative position. Islam is actually quite a conservative religion, but if there's a liberal opinion and it's accepted by the scholars as valid, and these are scholars that are in the Isnad tradition. ما لا يتوصل للواجب إلا به فهو واجب. If you can only get to an obligation through a means, then that means becomes an obligation. مخالفة الجماعة فيما أبيح لنا ليس من شيم الأئمة. To go against the group in things that are permitted is not from the characteristic of true leaders. So when you see people doing something in their urf, you don't go against the urf just to be different. Or you think this is the sunnah. The sunnah is to be with the group. The Prophet ﷺ said, Al-jama'atu rahma wal-firqatu adab. Jama'ah is a mercy, wal-jama'ah ta'ifatu min al-nas ala gharadan wahid. Jama'ah is a group of people with one goal. So a jama'ah of musafirin are going to the same place. So they're called jama'ah. The Muslims are jama'ah because our goal is ridwan Allah and Jannah. To please God, to please His Messenger, and to get into paradise. So we all have the same goal. Everybody in this room has the same goal as a Muslim, is to please God and get into paradise. Right? Hopefully. That's our goal. وقاية العرض بترك سنة واجب في الدين. To protect your dignity, even if it means leaving a sunnah, is from the deen. So there are situations where if you're going to be humiliated for the sunnah, then you leave the sunnah. If you're in an area where to dress in a certain way is going to cause people to attack you or something like that, you shouldn't do it, even if you believe it's the sunnah to do it. Because you should never put yourself in a situation where you're going to be humiliated. And again, he'll talk about in the book, for instance, Isa ibn Abdul Salam was asked about standing, because the sunnah is not to stand. He said, but the sunnah is also, لا تقاطعوا ولا تدابروا. Don't split up and don't be divisive. Right? Don't turn your backs on one another. So he said, if we don't stand in these days when the urf is to stand, we'll end up creating division. Because people will see the person and say, what's his problem? Why isn't he standing? He doesn't respect me. So he's saying that it's worse to create dissension. That's one of the greatest ulama in the history of Islam, Izz ibn Abdul Salam. That was his fatwa. And there are many examples like that amongst the A'immah. Qadi Ismail, one of the greatest Malikis, was in a gathering in Baghdad, and the minister of the Caliph, who was a Christian, came into the room, and he stood up and greeted him. He saw the ulama that were in his gathering look at him, and he was the biggest Maliki scholar of that time. He was considered mujtahid fil madhab. They looked at him like, what's he doing? Why is he doing that? And when the Christian left, he said, I saw you got upset about me standing. He said, this is a minister from the government. You know, that he has the affairs of Muslims, whether you like it or not, in his hands. And Allah did not prohibit us from showing bir to them if they don't oppose us in our religion. Right? لا ينهاكم الله عن الذين لم يقاتلوكم في الدين أو تخرجوكم من دياركم أن تبروهم. Right? That Allah didn't prohibit you from showing those لم يقاتلوكم في الدين. They didn't fight you in your religion أو يخرجوكم من دياركم. That, or chase you out of your homes. أن تبروهم. Right? To show them bir. So he used that verse over the other one, فَلْيَجِدُ فِيكُمْ غِلْظَةً. You know, like, let them find harshness. That's another time. That's when you're at war, you don't want to be soft and gentle, you know, let's all sing kumbaya, and they're shooting bullets at you. That's stupidity. But that's not normally how you should behave with people. If they're nice to you, be nice to you. Ibn Abbas, you know, a Jewish man said, Salaam alaikum. And the other man greeted him back. And he got angry at him. They went to Ibn Abbas. He said, Wallahi, if Fir'aun said something nice to me, I'd say something nice back to him. You know, this is the way they were. This whole harshness and this, where did that come from? Right? Where did that come from? It's a very strange thing. حقيقة التقليد قبول قول الغير من غير حجة وأما ما سمعته عن رسول الله فليس بتقليد لأنه حجة في نفسه. The reality of taqleed is to conform to the opinion of another without knowing the proof. It's to accept the opinion of another without knowing their proof for it. That's taqleed, which is a negative thing in our religion, but it's the hukm of people that don't have knowledge. It's to get out of taqleed is a good thing, but if that's where you are, that's where you are. وَأَمَّا مَا سَمِعْتُهُ عَنْ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ. But what you hear from the Prophet, فَلَيْسَ بِتَقْلِيد. If you have understanding, yeah, it's important that, this is like, if you can't follow the hadith without knowledge of Arabic and grammar and studying hadith with ulama. من حضرت له نية في مباح ولم تحضر له في فضيلة فالمباح أولى. If you have niyyah with a mubah to make it something good and you don't have niyyah with a virtue, then the mubah is better than the virtue. المباح يصير مكرمة بالنية. The mubah can become a positive thing by intention, an honorable thing that you get a reward for. So to eat is permitted. Kulu washrabu. It's permitted. Ibaha. But if you eat with the intention of taqwiyya for ibadah, then it becomes a makruma. المعصية لا تنقلب أبدا مكرومة بسبب النية. No disobedience can ever become a makruma because of niyyah, because of your intention. واستثنوا من هذا, but they excluded from this مصلحة شرعية لم تنال إلا بمفسدة دونها. But they took the lesser of two evils out of this. So, if you have to do something that normally would be a ma'asiyah, but it's a way of preventing a greater ma'asiyah, then that's the exception. المعصية إذا كانت تدرأ معصية أعظم فإنها تفعل. If doing something prohibited will prevent something greater that's prohibited, then it's done. I want to finish this, but I'm going to stop here. These are very important. But I'll end with one. العمي لو زنى أو سرق. A common person, if he fornicates or steals, كان خيرا له من أن يتكلم في العلم بلا ولا يعلم. That a common person, if he fornicates and steals, it's better for him than he speaks about knowledge of this religion without any training. And that's based on the ayah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala إنما حرم ربي الفواحش ما ظهر منها وما بطن والإثم والبغي بغير الحق وأن تشركوا بالله ما لم ينزل به سلطانا وأن تقولوا على الله ما لا تعلمون. Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah in I'lam al-Muwaqqi'in, he says that this ayah it's a tartib of the severity of prohibitions. The first are the fawahish, right? And those are like any foul thing, like fornication is a fahisha. لا تقربوا الزنا إنه كان فاحشة وساء سبيلا. Don't go near fornication because it's a fahisha. So fawahish are less than أن تقولوا على الله ما لا تعلمون, that you say about God what you don't know. So he's saying it's better for that person. Here, khayru means أقل شرا, less evil. It's not a good thing, but it's less evil. And this is, if people understood that, really, we would stop talking. I mean, these are momentous things. The Imam Malik, when he was asked a question in fiqh, he would say, "Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un." That's what you say when you, إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ قَالُوا إِنَّ لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. He would actually see it as a calamity, that he's being asked about the deen of Allah. Because he has to give an opinion that he thinks this is God's opinion. Who wants to take that responsibility? There have been incidents of people being murdered for committing blasphemy towards the Prophet ﷺ. What would be the usuli approach to this? Well, first of all, nobody can, لا ضرر ولا ضرار. Nobody can take the law into their own hands. Blasphemy laws are judged by qadis. It's not nobody can kill another. I mean, look, think about this. If I wanted to murder somebody, all I would have to tell the judge, oh, I heard him say something bad about the Prophet, so I killed him. Oh, okay, you can go. What kind of, think about that. It's crazy. Nobody can take the law into your own. And then the laws of Islam do not apply in the lands of other peoples. They can do whatever they want. Allah, كَفَيْنَاكَ الْمُسْتَهْزِينَ. We will take care of the mockers. The Prophet ﷺ was mocked in Mecca. His Sahaba didn't go and kill anybody. Even when they were making fun of him and intending him, they wrote a poem and they used the name Mudhammam, which is the opposite of Muhammad. He said, look how Allah has removed their tongues from me. They're talking about some guy named Mudhammam and I'm Muhammad. You know, it's like he didn't give them any reality. It's like have you ever seen that surrealist painting that it's a picture of a pipe and it says, this is not a pipe, right? To make you think. It's not a pipe. It's just an image of a pipe. It's not the pipe. So anybody who draws a caricature and says that that's the Prophet Muhammad, they're lying. And if you bring me anybody from the ulama or the Muslims that have any 2 cents of brains to have them swear an oath that that's our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they're kafir. If they say that's the Prophet, they're kafir. It's not the Prophet. It's some stupid thing from their own imagination. And unfortunately, some Muslims are painting those pictures for them by their behavior. They contribute the pens and the paper. In the Islamic tradition, what are the most effective ways to learn and perfect a language, specifically Arabic and English language? Is there book recommendations to help doing so? I mean, first of all, language, speaking and writing, there's an element of it that's clearly a gift, but there's also a large part of it that is acquisition. So you can learn and master. Sheikh Saeed Ramadan al-Buti, Allah yarhamuhu, told me that he tried to write poetry, but he never could. I know people like Zain al-Abidin, who's the son of Sheikh Abdullah ibn Bay. He's a brilliant poet. And in fact, I'm going to read one of his poems for you guys before I go, inshallah. But a brilliant poet. He didn't study arud. Sheikh Saeed studied arud. He studied prosody and the rules of versification. Zain al-Abidin could just do it from hearing it. He just hears the meters. Those are mawahib gifts. But to learn grammar in any language is difficult. English grammar is complicated. I've spent a lot of time studying English grammar. I still get confused on some rules, and Arabic is also difficult. The most difficult thing in Arabic is sarf. Sarf it's a tough one, sarf. But the grammatical rules of Arabic are actually relatively easy. They don't take a long time to master. I would suggest, if you're an English speaker, first studying through the medium of English. I think it's preferred to an immersion method. Personally, I did the immersion method, and there were a lot of nuances that I did not really understand until I started teaching Arabic through the medium of English. And it really helped because when there's certain idioms in Arabic that became much clearer to me when I saw translations for them in English. So I would recommend doing that first if you're Ajami, and that's traditionally how Ajam were taught. They were taught through the medium of their own language in a lot of Muslim countries. Like in Urdu-speaking countries, they use books that are written in Urdu to study Arabic grammar. It helps. But eventually you have to go into the Arabic grammatical text, the Ajurumiyya, the Qatr al-Nada, Mulhat al-I'rab. I would recommend studying the traditional ones. Some people prefer Nahw al-Wadih and some of the modern ones. The modern ones Nahw al-Wadih is good grammar. It's a good book. But the earlier ones are easier to memorize, and a lot of the rules need simply to be memorized by rote. So, but there's good books. There's a very nice book called Gwyn's Grammar, which I'm using in my freshman seminar. It was written by an English grammarian. It's short. it gives you a very good overview of, and he makes a beautiful argument for why grammar is so important. He actually believes that grammar can save the planet. Like if we would just learn proper grammar, we could start communicating again. And he makes a very solid logical argument that the lack of grammar is threatening the well-being of the planet. So, with reference to quantitative and qualitative sciences, which are the most important amongst them to study in order to respond to the crises of the age? The qualitative sciences are more important in our tradition than the quantitative because the qualitative relate to revelation. You don't need to know mathematics other than very simple fractions to practice Sharia. And Sahaba had very limited knowledge of mathematics, but they were masters of language and they were natural logicians and rhetoricians. So they did not know the formal sciences of rhetoric and logic, but they knew them intuitively. And like Socrates is one of the most brilliant logicians in history, but he did not study logic. It was Aristotle that looked at what Socrates was doing and developed the rules of logic from Socratic method. The same is true of Imam Shafi'i. Malik was practicing usul al-fiqh, but Shafi'i looked at what he was doing and what the other mujtahidun were doing, and he codified it. It's a type of genius that's able to derive rules from natural practice. And so, for instance, there's a reason why if I say to you, ask not what Zaytuna can do for you, but ask what you can do for Zaytuna. That somehow sounds better than saying, instead of thinking about what Zaytuna can do for you, you should really, think about helping Zaytuna. It just sounds better, and you'll remember it for some reason, right? So, all rhetoric is looking at great rhetoricians and noticing that they use certain tropes and figures, and then, like for instance, alliteration, genus. For some reason, a man should not, be judged by the color of his skin, but by the content of his character. Listen to all the kas in there. We like alliteration just naturally, and that's why, if you said, don't judge people by the way they look, judge by the way they act. It doesn't sound as good. And so rhetoric is partly a bag of tricks that you learn in studying rhetoric, but it's also a way of really understanding why the Quran was so powerful. Because Abu Bakr al-Baqalani, who was a great rhetorician, wrote a book proving that there is not one sentence in the Quran that could be rhetorically improved upon. And he shows how the Jahili poets, all of them, the greatest of them, had bad lines. And he said that you cannot find any verse in the Quran that could be rhetorically improved upon based on these rules of rhetoric. In a time with much confusion and shortening of usuli fuqaha, how can we reconcile difference of opinion or know what's right if we're not on the track of becoming full scholars? Well, part of it is to try to identify people that you trust, which is difficult in and of itself. For me, I haven't met anybody that I trust more than Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya, but he's a human being, and he could be wrong on some things. So, and there's scholars that I really like, but I don't agree with them on all the issues. So, in the end, at one level, Islam is very simple, and you don't need to complicate it, really. The simplest person can understand this religion. But there's certain, one of the things Sheikh Abdullah quotes a lot is the 4 criteria that you should always use to judge anything. That Islam is mercy, it's rahmah, and it's not cruelty. It's always rahmah. Even when it's a harsh thing, like a surgeon's knife, it should be extremely sharp. It would be cruel for the surgeon to use a dull scalpel, right? Or a saw. Like, what are you doing with that? Well, I need to, open up your stomach. Why are you using a saw? I don't have a scalpel. So you don't want a cruel surgeon. So it's all rahmah, and it's also all maslaha. It's all benefit. It's not mafsada. So if it's harmful, it's not from Islam. And it's all hikmah. It's wisdom. So if it's foolish or stupid, it's not from Islam. And it's all just. It's adala. It's justice. So if it's not just, if it's oppressive or wrong, it's not from Islam. A lot of that you can, just your common sense and what your mom and your dad taught you are good standards and criteria. So if it doesn't sound right, it probably isn't. Now, unfortunately, people can get brainwashed, and there's a lot of people doing that, you know. But the Prophet ﷺ did not have anybody do any suicide missions in Mecca or Medina, and he didn't permit it. I think that was one of the biggest mistakes, because there are some ulama that justified it, but they always justified it, only in the context of Palestine. Doesn't work like that. You open a door, and then you open a door for depressed people. Like somebody he's depressed. I mean, who's going to strap on bombs onto themselves and go kill themselves? You know, and think they're doing good. These guys have killed more Muslims than anybody fighting the Muslims. I have read from Al-Ghazali some texts recording talismans to depict the logically unexplainable. Is it condemned? You know, there's something called a ta'weedha, which there are hadiths against it because the Jahili Arabs used to do them. But the ulama in Maliki fiqh, I don't know about the other methods, but in Maliki fiqh it's permitted to write them. They're not encouraged. But some people have a lot of waswasa, and so it's permitted to write something from the Quran that they can carry with them to give them some kind of, it's almost like a psychological treatment of just waswasa, just to calm them down or something like that. But it could only be from the masnoon. And there is a hadith that the Prophet put them on Hassan and Hussein, which is where they take that from. When speaking of khilaf or something being agreed upon, does he mean within one madhab across the four madhab or even the dead ones across? Yeah, khilaf, it means if it was a rightly guided mujtahid who's recognized by the ummah as having achieved the level of ijtihad, and there are levels of ijtihad. So you have the mujtahid al-mutlaq is an absolute mujtahid. This is like Abu Hanifa, Imam Shafi'i, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Imam Malik ibn Anas, Imam Layth, Imam Abu Sufyan al-Thawri, Imam al-Awza'i, and some claim, Suyuti initially claimed ijtihad mutlaq. Some say Imam Kandahlawi from India, who wrote Hujjatullah al-Baligha, was a mujtahid mutlaq. There have been claims later, but in the early period, the agreed upon ones, there were several people that reached this level. And those are people that actually have their own usul. So for instance, Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu, he has a position where he will not take hadiths even if they're sahih, if he thinks it goes against something in a Quranic principle that he makes from qiyas. Or, for instance, he won't accept, there's certain hadiths like Abu Huraira, if it's in a fiqh issue. Abu Huraira was not known for his fiqh. He was known as a rawi of hadith, although he did give fatwa, but rarely. He was not from the muftin of the Sahaba, but he did give some fatwa. But for instance, Abu Huraira has a hadith about, whoever does wudu, it'll give you nur, and the Prophet ﷺ said, so let him increase in that. So he used to do the wudu beyond the elbow to get more nur. The ulama said that was a misunderstanding of the hadith, because it was actually meaning doing wudu on wudu. So even if you're in wudu, to do wudu again before the prayer, that's how you do it. So that's an example where, he understood something, but it wasn't what the fuqaha understood from it. Radiallahu anhu. So there are many examples of that where he differs from Imam Malik. Imam Malik took the amal of Ahl al-Madinah over ahad hadith. So if the hadith was a solitary, which means that there's two basic types of hadith: ahad and then mutawatir. Mutawatir means so many people related, it's factual. So it's a factual hadith. It's impossible. Like the Quran is mutawatir. And so this is called qat'iyyat al-wurud in usul. It means that it's a decisive statement that cannot be denied. And there are hadiths like the Prophet naha an qatl an-nisa wal awlad. And then you have tawatur lafzi, you have tawatur ma'nawi. So you have hadiths that are mutawatir in actual level of it. Man kadba alayya muta'ammidan falyatabawwa maq'adahu min an-nar. That's lafzi. Like it was related so many times in the same way that it has factual. It's as good as an ayah of Quran in terms of its reliability. A hadith that is ma'nawi means even though it's related in different meanings, in different phrases, the meaning is mutawatir. So for instance, the prohibition on killing women, children, and non-combatants is mutawatir. So you cannot kill women or children or non-combatants in war. It is haram, as strong as anything in the Quran is haram. The mutawatir are, there's a difference of opinion about how many there are, but they're not more than 500. It's a small amount of hadith. There are over 54,000 hadiths altogether. Only 500 of them, around 500, are considered mutawatir. And they've been collected in books. From the ahad hadith, you have variations. So you have sahih. Every mutawatir is sahih. I mean, it's higher than sahih. But you have sahih, you have sahihun bi ghayrihi, hasanun bi ghayrihi, and then you have da'if, and then you've got over like several categories of da'if. I mean, you're getting into, depending on the types of words they use, you'll get into dozens. But there's over 20 categories of da'if hadith. And so the weak hadiths, depending on how weak they are, depends on what you can use it for. So most of the ulama agree you can use them for fadail al-amal, which are virtuous acts, like reading Yasin for over the dead people. Some people differ on that. It's a weak hadith. اقرأوا ياسين على موتاكم ياسين ما قرئ له. But most of them say it's permitted. Ibn Rushd said this is a khilaf about Allah's rahmah. It's better to err on the side of rahmah. Don't make a big deal out of it. So these are fadail al-amal. A weak hadith is not fabricated. If it was fabricated, it would be called mawdu'. It means that the Prophet probably said it, but the probability is less than a sahih hadith. So it gets a C grade as opposed to a B like a hasan hadith, or an A like a sahih hadith, and then you have A+, muttafaqun alayh. And then you have 100%, which is the mutawatir. So, and then weak, that's very weak, it's a D. And then flunk is a mawdu'. So you don't throw out a D paper, but it's not the one you put up as the example, right? You don't use it for an example. But if that C paper has something that you didn't find in an A paper, then you might point that out. So that's where fadail al-amal, if you find it in a weak hadith, or in akhbar, like the ghaybiyat, the weak hadiths about the end of time are used because if they come true, then even if they're weak in the sanad, the fact that they've become true, that proves that the Prophet probably said it. And that's why and then munkar, people say, oh, it's a munkar hadith. They don't even know what munkar means. The munkar hadith can have soundness in the transmission, but only one person, or some, and then some it's not known. So if they say yarwi and manakir is different from huwa munkar al-hadith in the technical, these are, you know, these are all technical terms. When you study mustalahat al-hadith, you learn these distinctions. So, you know, the best thing is to, you know, find somebody that you trust, that people have not, you know, and hopefully that is not, if man shadda shadda fin nar, if they have opinions that aren't common, if they're really out there, then you just have to, the Prophet said, إِذَا اخْتَرَفْتُمْ فَعَلَيْكُمْ بِالسُّوَادِ الْعَظَمِ. The hadith, if you differ, follow the vast majority. It's better to be with the group. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك